Well, after that spectacular display on Saturday night with Woods and Conlan, I just thought I'd reflect, not really about that fight, but there was a bit of a subtext to this fight with the trainers as well. You know, we were talking about Booth against Davidson and all that sort of stuff. And I think that's going to carry on in British boxing for a little while. And I wanted to look at the role of the cornerman. Now, the cornerman is obviously, is the head trainer. They train the guy, they'll work out the tactics, they'll be there during the fight. And that's the chief second, the guy that's in the corner actually giving instructions and everything else. And I wanted to ask how pivotal they are. Because we look at that fight last night, going out for that 12th round, I would have thought, now I watched the DAZN and the DAZN, the package, the coverage was brilliant. Tony Bellew I thought was particularly good, especially when we were waiting for Conlan to come round. You know, he really understood the magnitude of what could potentially happen. And it was great to see that, that we had that happy ending in the end. But I think, the role of the cornerman is pivotal coming into the 12th round. You would have thought that Wood's corner would say you need a knockout to win. So Davidson would have said, you must go out, you must stop him in this round to win the fight. After Woods clawed his way back in, but his points deficit was still quite large. But he was really back in the fight. Conlan's corner, on the other hand, Booth could well have said, and like I say, the DAZN coverage didn't actually go into the corners and give us that feedback. But Conlan's corner could have said, just get away from him, just stay away from him, don't engage. We're home on points, and let's just take the victory that way. And that's exactly what we saw Roy Jones Jr. say to Chris Eubank Jr. when he was fighting against Liam Williams. He said, you're so far ahead on points, it's the 12th round, just move away and don't engage, and we'll just take the victory that way. So the instructions from the corner can be pivotal, and they obviously give a fighter the instruction of how to go out and do things. But I suppose people would also say, Woods has been fighting since he was so young, Conlan's been fighting since he was so young, they would know what to do. Woods would know he had to go out and try and get the knockout, and arguably they're trying for that through the whole fight. So how pivotal is that role of the cornerman? And I think, well, if we look back, the answer to that question, I think, if you can oppose that, is in a fight where one fighter is planning superior to the other, the cornerman's role is fairly superfluous. You don't do a lot. You're really just a utilitarian function of putting the stool in, putting the water in, and everything else. When a fight is close, that's when a cornerman really comes into his own, and that's when it can give you the extra few percent that you need to navigate a fight, navigate your way to victory. And some famous examples of this. The cornerman being, playing a big role in the intervention in the fight. I mean, I'm thinking back 1963, Henry Cooper against who was then Cassius Clay, later became Muhammad Ali. And in their 1963 fight, at the end of the 4th round, Cooper knocked Clay down very heavily with a left hook. Clay plainly hadn't recovered in the interval. They were using smelling salts. He was standing up and everything else. Angelo Dundee, who was chief second in the corner, noticed a small tear in the glove, worked the tear, called the referee over and said, look, I need these gloves changed, before the fight continues. He then won, obviously, a little bit of extra time for his fighter to recover. And the course of history arguably could have been changed if a dazed Cassius Clay had gone out into the 5th round with Cooper, although I don't think, in a month of Sundays, Cooper was ever going to beat Clay. But anyway, it wasn't the 3 minutes that everybody sort of speculates has become a bit of an urban myth. It was a few extra seconds that Dundee bought his fighter, but they could have been pivotal. Dundee features again in corner interventions, 1981, Sugar Ray Leonard against Thomas Hearns, and Dundee famously at the end of the 13th round. Sugar Ray Leonard really looked all at sea. He looked lost. Tommy Hearns was coming into the ascendancy. Sugar Ray Leonard's eye was swollen. He sat down in the corner and he just looked lost. Dundee just got in there, very calm, very collected, and said, "You're blowing it, son. You're blowing it." Probably some of the most famous lines ever said in the corner. And he gave an incredible motivational speech, got Sugar Ray up. Sugar Ray went out and stopped Hearns in the 14th round, which he needed to do for victory. And in a way, last night, Conlan Woods, for the wrong, it was it was an amazing fight. Amazing tired fight. Showed what's kind of best about this game, and also showed how hard this game can be and how unforgiving it can be. And there was kind of shades when Conlan was unconscious and receiving oxygen in the corner, and Woods, to his great credit, and class, wouldn't celebrate, was visibly upset about the situation, was in tears in the press conference until he knew Conlan was all right. And there's some wonderful photos of them two together after the fight, embracing, when they're all sort of, backstage, later on. But it brought back shades of Ben McClellan. And I think Ben McClellan is a great illustration of how important a corner can be in a fight, where the fight is close and the fight is in the balance. So if you look going into that fight, Gerald McClellan was trained by the late great Emmanuel Stewart out at the Cronk gym. McClellan was famously a little bit of an acerbic character, and coming into this fight, he'd been knocking everyone out. He'd been knocking everyone out. He cleaned up at middleweight. His fights lasted 1 or 2 rounds. Then he moved up to super middleweight and got a shot against the WBC super middleweight champion. He was previously WBC middleweight champion. The super middleweight champion was Nigel Benn, so he got a shot there, first fight at super middleweight. And he was thinking, well, I've got to go to London. I've got to fight this guy. I'm getting paid a couple of £1 million. I'm supposed to give 10%. to Emmanuel Stewart, 10% of my fee. I don't get any advice from this guy because I just go in and knock him out. That's all I need to do. So I don't need him. So he dispensed with Emmanuel Stewart. He paid a flat fee to a friend of his, a former trainer, and said, you work the corner, you know, you hand the bucket up, everything else, put the stool in, you know, basically I'll go and knock the guy out. Nigel Benn, on the other hand, was trained by Denny Mancini, a guy that he knew well and that knew Nigel well. Now, if we all remember that, the opening of that fight, McClellan just came out, blitzed Ben, knocked him through the ropes. Ben was pushed back into the ropes, was staggering all over the place. Didn't look like he was going to make it through the round. Finally made it through the first round, staggered on very unsteady legs back to his corner. He had just landed, you know, a shot on McClellan. Probably about the only shot he landed at the end of the round. He staggered back on unsteady legs to the corner. Now, Denny Mancini, in what I think is a fantastic piece of corner work, looked at Nigel, sat him down. What would you have said? I would have probably said, Nigel, keep your hands up, go around, back off, use the jab, stay out of trouble till your head clears. Denny Mancini said, you've done him, Nigel. You've fucking done him. He's dropped his arsehole. Now you get out there and you do exactly to him what he's done to you. Now off you go. That was the advice. Attack. Because Denny Mancini knew his fighter, and Ben was just like, oh, coming back all at sea. All of a sudden, Ben was like, that's what I know how to do. That's what I'm going to go and do. And he went and turned the fight around, and it turned it into that war of attrition. And he dragged McClellan into that war of attrition, in which Ben was eventually victorious in the 9th round. So that was a case of knowing your fighter, knowing exactly what to say to that fighter at that time to motivate him and turn around what seemed like an impossible situation. The contrasting in the other corner was McClellan wasn't really getting any advice. You know, the guy in the corner was working for McClellan, you know, was giving him some vague bits of advice, but really, McClellan was the boss. He wasn't there to tell McClellan what to do. He was just there as the utilitarian function of putting the stool in, holding the water bottle up. So McClellan allowed himself to get dragged into that war with Ben. Now, I would say, and this may be a bit controversial, but I would say that if Denny Mancini hadn't been in Nigel Benn's corner that night, he would have lost that fight. And if Emmanuel Stewart had been in McClellan's corner, I believe he would have won that fight. Because, you know, he would have told him to box smart, he would have read the fight as it went on and given McClellan the best advice. But, you know, that's my theory anyway, and obviously we'll never be able to prove anyways. But there were shades of Ben McClellan last night when Conlan was on the ground. But, you know, thank God he came round, he was absolutely fine. He's already calling for the rematch, you know, which would be a tremendously exciting prospect. So the importance of the cornerman in boxing, you know, they can be pivotal in a close fight. And the battle of the trainers goes on, I suppose. And, you know, a big feather in the cap to Ben Davidson. I mean, it's the second time he's taken Leigh Wood as an underdog, you know, into a fight. And this is what people were criticising him. He's getting great fighters already. You know, and then their performances aren't great. You're looking at Josh Taylor, obviously, a lot of criticism after that. But, you know, you can't argue with that last night. You know, Leigh Wood was the underdog going in this, as he was against Kanzu. And you know, after the first couple of rounds, he didn't look like he was going to make it out of really the second round. He came back, got himself back into the fight and forced that stoppage. You know, so the role of the corner can be pivotal in a close fight. That's my opinion for this week. Next week, we're looking at Warrington Kiko Martinez coming up on the 26th of March. So, yeah, have a great week, everyone, and I'll speak to you soon.